Welcome, boys and girls. My name is Miss Noreen, and I'm here with you for another exciting lesson in ELA. The lesson focus is ELA Grade 4, Module 9, Day 4, Into Writing, Understanding Our World. The lesson objective: identify primary and secondary research sources. Let's say that together. Identify primary and secondary research sources. Let's get started with that. So what are primary sources? A primary source is an artifact, document, or other source of information that was created at the time under study. Primary sources represent real pieces of history, such as inventions, letters, diaries, or photographs. So primary sources were created at the time under study. That's very important for us to know, because that tells us that primary sources have to have happened or have been created by the person and at the time of the study. And they're real pieces of history, meaning that they were present in that time during history. They can include inventions, letters, diaries, or photographs. So remember that when you're thinking primary sources. Now let's take a look at this photograph. Is this a real photograph from history? What is being shown in the photograph? So if I take a look at this photograph right here, it's showing me that it took place a long time ago because it is a black and white photo. I also know it took place a long time ago because the vehicle that the girl is standing in is not similar to what the vehicles and cars look like today. So this is a real photograph from history which happened a long time ago. And what's being shown is a little girl in a car or a vehicle during that time. So this is actually a primary source. Now let's go to the next type of source that we can look at, and that is secondary sources. A secondary source is an opinion, account, or interpretation. Let's say that together, interpretation of a past event by someone who wasn't actually there. Examples of secondary sources include encyclopedia entries, movies about historical events, and textbooks. So secondary sources were not created by the real person, and they weren't made by people who were there during that time in history. They include secondhand accounts of the event or the place, and those can be found in things such as encyclopedias, movies, or textbooks. So let's take a look at this letter. This was a letter written by a man named George about the Civil War. It was written in 1861. Now, is this a primary or a secondary source? Let's go back to it. So it's a letter written by a man named George who was there during the Civil War, and it was written during the time of the Civil War. So based on the fact that it was written by someone who was there during that time in history, this tells me that this is, you guessed it, it's a primary source. If you got that correct, give yourself a pat on the back. So let's take a look at this photograph. Now, what is this postcard referencing? From this postcard, I can see it's referencing the different houses that President Abraham Lincoln lived in, okay? Is this a photograph or a piece of art? It looks like a piece of art because it does not seem like an actual photograph that was taken. So I know it's not something that was taken during the time of a historical event. So we know that President Lincoln died more than 140 years ago. Do you think the artist ever met Abraham Lincoln? I don't think he met Abraham Lincoln because this photograph or this postcard was made after Abraham Lincoln had died. So this artist did not meet Abraham Lincoln, but he used information about his life to create this postcard of the different homes that President Lincoln lived in. So does this image look like it's from Lincoln's time? I don't think so, because all these images were created and they were drawn. So they were not taken during the time of when President Lincoln was alive. So my answers to all these questions lead me to believe that this is not a primary source. This is actually a secondary source. Now let's try another photograph. Well, this is a postcard. It's dated 1920. And it's a postcard of the Cumberland Gap Strategic Civil War Point near Pineville, Kentucky. So let's take a look at this. Now, we know that it's a postcard. It's from the time of the Civil War, but we know the Civil War took place in the 1800s. This postcard was dated 1920. So is this a primary source or a secondary source? And this seems to be a painted, let's go back one more time. It seems like it's a painted postcard and it's not an actual photograph. So based on that, primary or secondary sources, I want you to write it down in your notebook. And if you guess secondary source, give yourself a round of applause because you got that correct. Let's try a game together now. We're going to practice our skills that we just learned on determining whether a source is primary or secondary. Are you ready for the game? If you are, here we go. First question, a play showing how Benjamin Franklin flew a kite during a lightning storm. Is that a primary or a secondary source? You guessed it. It's a secondary source. The next question, a short story describing Edison and Tesla's battle over electricity. Is that a primary or a secondary source? There you go. It is a secondary source. Next question. Anne Frank's diary describing her life during World War II. It's the time of when she was alive, so it is a primary source. You got that. Next question. A cartoon showing how Pocahontas met John Smith. A cartoon, meaning not real? So I know that must definitely be secondary. Awesome work, guys. Next question. A textbook describing the civil rights movement. I know textbooks are what types of sources? They are secondary sources. Awesome work. Next question. A news report about the opening of a power plant. A news report about the opening of a power plant. Is that a primary or secondary? That is a primary source. Next question. A scientist explaining what it was like for Buzz Aldrin to walk on the moon. A scientist explaining what it was like for Buzz to walk on the moon? That must be a secondary source. There we go. A YouTube video describing how the pyramids were built. That one should be very simple because we know it didn't take place during the actual time, so it's a secondary source. There we go. An interview with Alexander Graham Bell about how he invented the telephone. Wow, an actual interview, which means that it was during the time of when Alexander Graham Bell was alive. That would be a primary source. Next question. A radio broadcast from the day the Soviet Union launched the satellite Sputnik. Wow, an actual radio broadcast from the day of the event? I know, that is primary source. Wow, you guys did an awesome job with figuring out what is a primary and a secondary source. Now you're experts at determining what type of source something is. Now we're going to apply those skills to your independent work part of the session. So for your independent work today, in your writer's notebook, you will create a research plan. You will need to search through materials to select which ones you would like to use. Make sure to determine which sources you would like to utilize in your report, primary sources or secondary sources. Make sure to include both and see how they can be accurately depicted inside your research writing. Thank you so much for watching, boys and girls. This is Miss Noreen logging off. Happy learning.